Queers for Palestine shut down the Manhattan Bridge with a protest for Gaza, and I wonder how many of them understand that the people they are protesting for are anti-LGBTQ. Also, discriminatory holiday parties are okay if you're discriminating against white people. All of that and more on this week's episode of Just Say No. I am your host, Noelle. Let's get into it. So before we jump into any of that fun stuff, I actually have an update for you guys from last week's episode. To give the absolute bare minimum footnotes, just in case you missed it, the president of Harvard, along with the presidents of UPenn and MIT, testified in front of Congress recently, stating that calls for genocide against Jews on their campuses only went against their code of conduct in certain contexts, which obviously sparked some backlash. Since then, the president of UPenn, President McGill, has resigned after a ton of calls for hers and the other two presidents' resignation. And at the time of recording last week's episode, Harvard was actually having a board meeting to decide on their next steps. And as of now, Harvard has put out a letter that they will not be firing President Gay, nor will she be resigning. This came about 3 days after President McGill resigned from UPenn, and there were just a few things that happened in those 3 days that make the fact that she's not resigning even more surprising. Not the least of which being the fact that it actually came out that she has plagiarized large portions of her PhD thesis. And not only that, but she actually plagiarized, I think, half, if not more than half, of the scholarly papers that she has published. They're all plagiarized. So this paired with her inability to condemn calls for genocide against a large group of her student population, and yet still the administration at Harvard refuses to fire her. And I believe that it is at this point that it just might be worth mentioning that President Gay is Harvard's first Black female president. And one must stop and wonder if the fact that she was an affirmative action hire might have something to do with her unwillingness to admit failure. But I digress. I just wanted to give that super quick update. We went super in depth on it last week, so on to newer and more exciting topics. Leftists continue to protest for people who would behead them given an opportunity. Last week, a huge group of Queers for Palestine marched on the Manhattan Bridge in the name of Free Palestine. The thing is that Queers for Palestine is an oxymoron. LGBTQ people do not have rights in Gaza, and they do not have rights in Palestinian Authority West Bank either. I saw someone say, you see Queers for Palestine, but you know what you don't see? Queers in Palestine. You want to know why? Because queers in Palestine get killed. And it goes beyond the marches, which are comedic in and of themselves. But there are also LGBTQ people posting online talking about how they are starting to do things, such as reading the Quran, and how excited they are about it. And all I can think is, what are you going to do when you get to the part where it actually condemns homosexuality, where it actually condemns your entire identity, your entire persona? What are you going to do then? It reminds me of a few weeks ago when the loons were going wild on TikTok and talking about how Osama freaking bin Laden might have been right because they read a paragraph or two out of his letter to the West and didn't bother to read or acknowledge the entire second half of this letter where he discussed calling the West to Islam and condemned homosexuality as a sin. They conveniently left that out. They conveniently didn't read that part of it. But with all of that in mind, as happens anytime you confront leftist ideology with facts, they have a word for why you are wrong about it. For example, if you believe that men and women are different, you're a TERF. If you believe that it's bad to be racist against anyone, including white people, you have white fragility. And if you believe it is odd that queers are in the streets protesting for people who would hang them in the street as people gathered around and cheered, you are pinkwashing. If you have never heard this term before, that is okay. I had not either. And to be honest, I am not sure that I totally understand it, but we are going to do our best to present the best faith argument for what pinkwashing is as we can. From what I have found, there are a few levels to it. So let's put our best foot forward, ladies and gentlemen. According to the onlines, pinkwashing, also known as rainbow washing, is the strategy of promoting LGBT rights protections as evidence of liberalism and democracy, especially to distract or legitimize violence against other countries or communities. And if that didn't clear up anything for you, don't worry, it didn't clear up anything for me either, so I continued my research. The term originated from Breast Cancer Awareness Month, when brands and corporations would use the pink ribbon and make everything pink for the month, and yet they would still sell carcinogenic products, which demonstrated the lack of actual care for the cause. And LGBTQ people co-opted the term in recent years, and now that Pride Month is all of the rage and companies go full-on Freddie Mercury for the month of June, but do so without full commitment to the bit and don't march on Capitol Hill for whatever the cause of the week is, you guessed it, they are pinkwashing. So that is all fine and dandy, and I can wrap my head around that, but where and how do they tie this into the Middle East? In this article that I found, that I think explains it in the best way that I have ever heard, says, quote, one of the most egregious examples of pinkwashing is the Israeli government's attempt at rebranding the country as a kind of gay mecca. In 2010, the Tel Aviv Tourism Board funded a $90 million campaign to sell the city as an international gay vacation destination. Today, Tel Aviv Pride is often touted as the largest pride event in Asia. This, despite growing concerns of human rights violations against Palestinians. So if you're still with me, let's see how much of this we can put together. Pinkwashing in corporate America is bad because companies are flying rainbow flags in stores and not in protests and marches. But Israeli pinkwashing is bad because they openly encourage LGBTQ tourism and support their rights and celebrate the movement, but are also fighting terrorism? Okay, I know I said that I was going to put my best foot forward and do a good faith argument, so we're going to stick to that. And in this context, the point that is trying to be made is, in the same way that American corporations use pride to make money, Israel uses pride to hide their, quote, human rights violations against Palestine. Unfortunately, this fails to acknowledge Hamas's role in all of this. You know, being a terrorist organization hell-bent on the death and destruction of Israel. But continuing with making a good faith argument from their perspective, taking pinkwashing into consideration, what I think the point is that it does not matter that Israel is staunchly pro-LGBTQ, and that the majority of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank are staunchly anti-LGBTQ, because the evils of Israel's existence in the area simply outweighs the fact that Hamas beheads homosexuals. But following the logic, Queers for Palestine is essentially saying, look, we are queer, and even we support Palestine over Israel, and that is intended to carry more weight because of the fact that Palestinians murder people for being gay. Now again, this argument is put together based on what I've read and what I saw, and frankly, if that isn't their argument, then it probably should be, because at least it kind of holds water. But at the end of the day, people can protest for whatever they want, as long as they're doing it peacefully. Queers can protest for Palestine all day, but we can also point out the irony of it. And frankly, these people's understanding of the conflict is clearly minimal, and I continue to find myself shocked at their ability to one-up themselves on bad takes. And honestly, there's just far too much to get into as far as the actual Palestinian and Israeli war. However, I do have a video that has been sitting in my backlog where I walk through the history of the region, and I have been meaning to record it and edit it. So maybe I'll do that, because truly it's just too complex for a short overview. But if that's something that you would be interested in seeing, I'll leave a poll down below and you guys can let me know. But anyways, we're going to move on to the next story, because it is, well, it's something. So on Tuesday of last week, an administration official sent out an email invitation for Mayor Wu's holiday party to the Boston City Councilors. This is pretty typical for companies or government agencies to have a holiday event for their employees and or their colleagues. Unfortunately, this administration official made a mistake and sent it out to all of the city councilors when it, in fact, was only intended for colored elected officials. No whiteys here, folks. According to the Boston Herald, the official, Denise Dos Santos, sent out a follow-up email 15 minutes later stating, quote, "I wanted to apologize for my previous email regarding a holiday party for tomorrow. I did send that to everybody by accident, and I apologize if my email may have offended you," end quote. So I'm not one to easily offend. And because we live in such a clown world, this story isn't particularly shocking nor offensive, but if we lived in a sane and rational society, then I would say, yes, being told that you cannot attend a party because of the color of your skin is, in fact, a decent basis for offense. Brian Worrell, the council vice president, stated, quote, "We make space and spaces for all kinds of specific groups in the city and city government, in that the elected officials of color, this is the group that the party was intended for, has been around for more than a decade," end quote. So yeah, right. Just because a racist idea and or organization has been around for a really long time, that totally makes it okay. That makes it okay. That makes perfect sense. And I mean, does it not strike anyone as odd to have a group based on nothing besides your skin color? Also, anytime you see that something is for people of color, let's just be honest about what that means. No white people. People of color embodies every ethnicity, every race except for Caucasians. They might as well hang a sign like it's the 1950s. But unfortunately, this article does go on, and it talks about Counselor Tanya Fernandez Anderson, who emailed back to Dos Santos saying, quote, "Your email should not offend anyone," end quote. So let's see if we got this straight. You're telling me that these same group of people who cry offense when they are glanced at incorrectly are saying that there is nothing a white person has to be offended about when they are told they cannot attend a party because they were born the wrong skin color. Absolute nonsense. Wu's administration is holding a larger party later this month in which everyone is invited, but if we are doing subsection parties, why can't the white council members have a party for them only? Or is that racist? Completely wildin'. Y'all, I cannot. All right, so on to the next. Our First Lady Jill Biden posted a holiday video from the White House, and my lord, when I tell y'all I was already motivated to figure out how to add visuals to this podcast, I sincerely am, but now I cannot keep missing opportunities like this, and this actually feels like a disservice that I cannot play this video for you guys in its full effect. So I will just have to do my best to give you a general idea, but I highly, highly, highly suggest going and watching it for yourself. So the theme appears to be tap dance, and the actual tap itself isn't bad per se, but there just isn't anything spectacular about it to me. Now, I'm not a tap dance expert. I took a tap class for about 2 days when I was 6 and I disliked it, but this just didn't strike me as particularly well done. But again, to be honest, I don't know what I'm talking about. It wasn't my style, and that's perfectly fine. But aside from that, the costumes looked like something that came out of a middle school theater performance. They're bad. They're very bad, and a lot of people were saying it was giving Hunger Games for multiple reasons. There's multiple reasons why people are equating this to Hunger Games, and the costumes are not the least of it. The biggest reason that people are comparing the two is because of how tone deaf this also comes off. There's a lot of people in the country who are really struggling this holiday season, and to put out such an extravagant, expensive video with all of these extravagant, expensive decorations in the White House, it just, feels tone deaf. But anyways, back to the video itself. The videography of this video is quite actually laughable. There's more than one transition in this video that makes me feel like I was watching a 13-year-old's YouTube video that she edited on iMovie. I mean, I just come back to the fact that it just wasn't done. It didn't feel tastefully done whatsoever. And it just had this underlining dystopian feeling to it. if you haven't watched it, go watch it. It's weird. But while it is ugly, in my opinion, and unimpressive, in my opinion, at least it was not over the top, in your face woke. I watched it and I thought, gee, that was unenjoyable, but for no other reason than it was poor quality and simply not my taste. But alas, the group that the White House chose to put on this tacky performance is called Dorrance Dance, and surprise, they are over the top woke. Their website, if you go to the Dorrance Dance website, it has a section for racial justice with links for BLM, which, just as an aside, I thought that after Patrisse Cullors, the co-founder of BLM, used all of the donations to enrich her family and buy mansions and not actually do anything to help the Black community, that we collectively decided that this organization was bunk. But the blind lead the blind. What can I say? So Dorrance Dance also has BLM protest information. They have resources for defunding the police. And again, I thought that we decided that this wasn't working. I thought this was another thing that we had moved past, with the heavy increase in crime in cities that defunded their police. But we're just gonna leave that one there for now. They have quotes on their website saying 5 ways white people can take action against white and state-sanctioned violence. I need someone to explain to me what that means, because you hear people saying this, and I am convinced at this point that they're just saying it to say it, and they don't actually have any substantive thought behind it. The website also has a whole section titled Educate Yourself, with the following description, quote, "For those who are investigating or have questions about white privilege, systemic racism, white fragility, and anti-racism, go to antiracismforbeginners.com. I shit you not. Do you know how mentally fucked you have to be to go to a website called Anti-Racism for Beginners? Pardon the F-bomb, but good Lord? Where do you have to be mentally? Anyway, another section has a note from one of the dancers discussing how tap is historically Black culture, which, again, I'm not a tap expert. I don't know. It very well could be, and if it is, all the more to ya. However, she goes on and says, quote, "It is our job to tell the history of tap dance as a celebration of Black culture." And she could have ended it there. And that's a wonderful statement. That's a great statement. But she goes on and says, "Also, the never-ending struggle against systemic racism and white supremacy in this country." And that's just, that's the quiet part out loud, isn't it? For them, it is never-ending. It does not matter how much we progress. It does not matter how much changes. They are permanent victims. And it's a pretty sad way of living, to be honest. But that's enough of that. We have one more story I wanted to get to today, because I know that a lot of these culture issues can be disheartening. So I do want to try to make an effort to cover stories that are good and uplifting and display the fact that there is progress being made for Team Sanity. So this week, news came out that Oklahoma Governor Stitt signed an executive order aimed at pushing back DEI offices and departments in the state's universities. Oklahoma is now among Texas and Florida and Iowa and a couple other states, I believe, who have been cutting funds for these types of programs. The order also prohibits, quote, diversity statements in the recruitment process, which is essentially the practice of stating your company stands with diversity, equity, and inclusion, or whatever the frick, to virtue signals. So like-minded applicants apply to your company and essentially dissuade otherwise qualified applicants from applying. So governors that are making this move are doing so by claiming that the offices eat up valuable financial resources with very little impact. And looking at an array of sources, the average salary of a DEI director is a minimum of 6 figures. So I would certainly say that this is a huge waste of finances for a department that pushes racism and exclusion. So this news found its way to me from a statement that was put out by the president of the University of Oklahoma, stating, quote, "Today, Oklahoma's governor signed an executive order eliminating offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion at all public higher education institutions in Oklahoma, including our own," end quote. And ladies and gentlemen, the applause could be heard across Twitter. I don't know about y'all, but I am so sick of hearing the words diversity, equity, and inclusion. It needs to go. In Governor Stitt's speech announcing the order, he said, quote, "Today we are going to encourage equal opportunity instead of promising equal outcomes," end quote. This is the bottom line. This is why it needs to go. Equity is the idea of ensuring everybody gets the same outcome no matter the effort that they put in. So they make these programs like affirmative action to try and even the playing field when in actuality it does more harm than good. At the end of the day, all these programs do is institute a philosophy of preferential treatment based on race or sex or sexual orientation, or even a combination of all three, instead of looking at a candidate's qualification, instead of looking at merit. And that is exactly how you end up with Karine Jean-Pierre, the world's literal worst press secretary, who was hired for no reason other than the fact that she is a Black lesbian woman. This is how you got Kamala Harris, who is the best example of failing your way to the top because she is a woman of color. And unfortunately, if you wanted to take this a step further, it could also to some degree instill a sense of unsuredness and borderline racism, because you look at people in these positions of authority and instead of thinking, wow, that person worked really hard and took the necessary steps to get where they are, some might start to think, is this person only in this position to fill the diversity quota? Which is something that happens. Just take a listen to this leaked audio from the CEO of IBM.
We take underrepresented and gender. You got to move both forward by a percentage. That leads to a plus on your bonus. By the way, if you lose part of your bonus. I'm not trying to finesse this. So for blacks, we should try to get towards 13-point-something%. On Hispanics, you got to get into the mid-teens. So let me say it. Asians in the US are not an underrepresented minority in a tech company.
Diversity hiring of this nature is discriminatory. You are choosing to pick applicants or not based on immutable characteristics. And again, the reason that they are doing this is because there were years of slavery, and then there's Jim Crow, and they view people of color as starting from a harder position than white people, which we could have a whole episode on this. I would argue that there is a class issue, not a race issue, but that is beside the point. I want to end this episode with this question. Do we address past discrimination with present discrimination? Because that's what we're doing with affirmative action and with these DEI offices. And I personally would argue not. But that is all for this week's episode. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you wouldn't mind, please give this show a rating, subscribe to us on Spotify. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, you can also give a review, and that would be super helpful for me. If you check out this video on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to me there. All of my social medias will be linked in the down bar below for you to check out. This episode has been an absolute blast, and I will talk to you guys next week.